So today I wanted to talk a little bit about compassion, and what I had in mind was, or what brought this up to my mind was reading some of the portfolios from the Course 3 and SAFE, and I was reflecting how this is a very vast topic. There's a lot to learn about compassion, and I don't think we got all the points into that course. And this came to my mind when, in some of the portfolios, some of the experiences that people had. And so I wanted to just say a few things to address, maybe some things to think about. So first is, we've already talked that compassion in the Buddhist context is the wish to relieve suffering and the causes of suffering. But we need to combine that with wisdom. And so this is where it gets a little tricky, because the situations that we get into can be quite complex. So I think it's good to realize first that what we're trying to do is first work with our mind and develop an internal state of mind. And then from a compassionate state of mind, then we're going to go out and maybe solve some kind of problems or whatever it is that we're working with. And so that's one thing, is to realize that it's a state of mind that we're trying to generate, and we need to take the time to do that first and set a very clear motivation. And then as we're doing an activity, of course our motivation is going to change, and the situations have an impact on us. And so it's good to then revisit our motivation and even our capacity. And so if you have a motivation to help someone, but you don't have the capacity, you still can be compassionate. You just maybe need to find someone else, get some of the resources, things like that. So I think it doesn't mean that you're not compassionate if you're not able to respond. And sometimes in some of the situations that I read about in the portfolios, people were in situations where the agencies they were working with maybe weren't training people very well. And so things were happening, and the volunteers were getting discouraged from the situation. And so I think if we think about what our motivation is, and then realize that if we get to a place where our mind is getting quite distressed with a situation, at that point we've lost our compassion, because now our focus is on ourselves and we're getting distressed. And what we want to try to do is work that out in our mind and bring back this mind of compassion where we're really thinking about the other person. Again, we have to think of this still as our state of mind and separate it from the activities that you're going to be involved in, but use a really, a peaceful state of mind where we can really think clearly and look at a situation and then act. And so this doesn't mean that we're always going to do what people want. That's one place where I noticed in the comments people made where they got into problems, because some of the things that situations they were in weren't actually necessarily for the long-term benefit of people. They were kind of getting taken advantage of. And so if you can step back and look at a situation and see that, this isn't really helpful in the long term. Maybe in the short term somebody's getting something out of it. People were actually getting a woman was doing a big sister, big brother kind of thing, and this family was getting gifts from her, and then the mother's getting gifts, and all these things like that happening, and she was really not happy with how this was going. Maybe that's not a situation that is actually even conducive in the long term or healthy in the long term. So we want to think about what's happening in the short term and what's happening in the long term. And then I think realize that we can give what we can give. And that's it. That's our capacity. And then being really clear on that, and things change during the course of things, and we have to reevaluate situations. So you can see that the situations can be kind of complex, so then we have to also acknowledge that being compassionate is something that takes a lot of skill when we get to the point of acting it in the world. And they say it's quite easy to understand compassion, the meaning of it and things like that, but to actually cultivate it and enact it, that's quite challenging in the day-to-day situations and the situations in our families, our cities, our world. that's a bigger thing. So in that regard, one thing that His Holiness the Dalai Lama says is that we need to be optimistic and plan for the worst. Not expect the worst, but plan for the worst. And so being optimistic is different from being idealistic. And this is where I've fallen into problems. Because if you're idealistic, then your mind's going to crash when things don't go. You know, you're not actually being realistic necessarily. So we want to take a mind of optimism into these situations and then do what we can and then, you know, rejoice in the good that we're trying to do in the world. So I'm hoping that this will be some little small points of clarification for people in Course 3, and that they'll realize that there's a lot to learn and read about compassion. And we just touched on the topic, and there's very many resources, books and teachings and all kinds of things where many different aspects of the situations that we get into can be explored.